Revelation chapter 12 brings to view the warfare between God's church and the powers of darkness. God's church is represented as a beautiful woman standing clothed with the sun on the moon, a symbol of the truth of God, His Word, and the sanctuary that are a reflection of the righteousness of Christ. She has on her head 12 stars. These stars represent the 12 tribes of Israel and the 12 apostles. The number 12 is the number of God's church. While the woman represents those in whom God's Spirit dwells in this earth, on the other side of the great battle is the great red dragon that John saw in vision. This dragon primarily represents Satan, but in various forms he is represented as those powers on earth that reflect his power and carry out his will. In one way or another through the centuries, the warfare has been between the Word of God and those who believe it, and the powers of Satan and all the counterfeit religions in this world that have tried to destroy that truth. One of the chief means of accomplishing this goal is to destroy the knowledge of what God's church really is and what its place has been in history. Historically, the history and the purpose of the Jews has been largely lost sight of by the Christian world, and the same is true about the apostolic church. Satan has billions of angels on this earth to carry out these purposes. The fact that the woman was pregnant and brought forth a man-child is indication that this was the time that Jesus was born and raised to heaven. In verse 6 we read, "And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she hath a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days." The term wilderness in Great Controversy 55 means obscurity and seclusion. 1,260 days is the 1,260-year period from 538 to 1798 of the Dark Ages of Roman supremacy. This is a clear indication that the Roman Catholic Church cannot be the Christian church, for God's true church was in obscurity during this time period. What conclusions are we to reach by this? That something has happened historically that has blinded our understanding to the true history of the Sabbath-keeping apostolic church through the centuries. We know that that history was a history of a people who struggled to maintain the truth at tremendous odds. Many were destroyed by the millions, wiped out by great powers directed by Satan. In verse 14 we read again, "And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, a symbol of divine guidance, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place where she is nourished for time and times and for half a time from the face of the serpent," indicating God would place her in a location in obscurity in this world and take care of her there for 1,260 years. "And the serpent cast out of his mouth water as a flood after the woman." That he might cause her to be carried away of the flood. But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon cast out of his mouth. What does these symbols represent? Well, at the time of Egypt, Israel was brought out of Egypt, God used the symbol of eagle's wings to represent spiritual or supernatural divine guidance. The flood coming out of the mouth of the dragon indicates the effort of Satan to destroy physically and spiritually by false doctrines the true teachings of the church. The earth swallowing up these false doctrines or efforts of Satan indicated that God's church continued to spread into remote areas of the world where it could not be affected by the efforts of Satan's church, the Roman papacy. So we find that in the remote areas of the earth, the truth continued to carry on, to arise again at the end of the time after the 1,260 days. The dragon was wroth with the woman and went forth to make war with her seed, with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. The dragon is angry today. He knows that this church that has been in obscurity through the centuries is about to arise to make war against him, and it is his determined effort to keep that from ever happening. We're destined to repeat history if we forget how God's led us in the past. It's time for a reminder of how God has guided the Seventh-day keeping church through history. As Jesus ascended up from his disciples going to heaven, he realized that they would face a terrible warfare, and so he sent his Spirit to guide them and give them power to wrestle with the powers of darkness and spread the truth to the end of time. The church, under the guidance of the Spirit, was powerful. It would go out to those areas where the Jews had scattered throughout the world. We know that Sabbath keeping was popular clear back to the time of Confucius because of the scattering of the Jews. In fact, we read in the writings of Confucius, 500 B.C., that the ancient kings on this culminating day closed their gates. They kept the Sabbath, even in China. And so, by the time the apostolic church spread the truth throughout the Jewish settlements of the world, there is not any city of the Grecians, nor any barbarian, nor any nation whatsoever where the custom of Sabbath keeping had not come. You see, the Jewish nation was to be where these disciples went first. The Jews were scattered in almost every country of the world at that time. And the first Christians were Jews. By the 4th century, Augustine could say, or could show, that the Sabbath was observed in his time in the greater part of the Christian world. And his testimony is very interesting because we know that Augustine himself was a Sunday keeper. While in the Roman world, the Christians faced terrible persecution as it was the military head of pagan idolatry. What about the Christianity that spread to the other continents and countries of the world? We find that in those areas, Christianity was well accepted. And the Christian Jews had formed an elite group of businessmen and industrialists and traders throughout the various countries of the world. You see, the early apostles imbued with the power of the Spirit were not afraid to go in right into the centers of pagan idolatry. And the letters of Peter were written from Babylon, as he was the great and the earliest patriarch of the area of Babylon and Mesopotamia. Because of their work there, we read that the hills of Persia and the valleys of the Tigris and Euphrates re-echoed their songs of praise. They reaped their harvests and paid their tithes. They repaired to their churches on the Sabbath day for the worship of God. Persia and Mesopotamia were early evangelized by those Spirit-filled evangelists sent out by the direction of Jesus Christ. That area of the world continued to develop its teachings and development the Christian church. St. Thomas went down, not only down through Persia, but down into India. And there along the Malabar coast, he established an outreach to the Brahmins and the Hindu people, and established one of the oldest and furthest reaching Sabbath-keeping Christian churches in history. It continued to keep the Sabbath clear down to the 16th and 17th century. 600 years after Christianity came to this part of the world, the Brahmins, realizing the power of Christianity in India, formed the counterfeit religion of Krishna, which is now making inroads again in the Western world. In India, China, and Persia, we read, widespread and enduring was the observance of the seventh-day Sabbath among the believers of the Church of the East and the St. Thomas Christians of India, who never were connected with Rome. It also was maintained among those bodies which broke off from Rome after the Council of Chalcedon, namely the Abyssinians, or the Ethiopians, the Jacobites, the Marianites, and the Armenians. The Abyssinians were first evangelized by the treasurer of the Queen of Ethiopia, who was baptized by Philip. One of the largest Sabbath-keeping bodies was to be found in Ethiopia, and it sent missionaries all the way through China and even to Japan. It continued to keep the Sabbath clear down to the 17th century. At that time, the Jesuits came in and slaughtered many of these people and forced their conversion. But because Ethiopia was so far away from the headquarters of Rome, we have an example of what apostolic Christianity was like, and these Sabbath-keeping bodies that baptized by immersion and before the coming of the Jesuits had none of the apostasy of the Roman Catholic Church. We read about Abyssinia, or Ethiopia. In the last half of that century, St. Ambrose of Milan stated officially that the Abyssinian bishop Metius had traveled almost everywhere in the country of Ceres or China. For more than 17 centuries, the Abyssinian church continued to sanctify Saturday as the holy day of the fourth commandment. Friends, these were Sabbath keepers. They were Seventh-day Christians, and they believed in the soon return of Christ. They were Seventh-day Adventists and had no connection to the Roman Catholic Church or the Reformation. This is truly the church